Two big talking points with the weather this week. We have another heat wave, an extreme heat warning. An amber one has been issued for central eastern, southeastern parts of the UK. And then there's the eclipse. Yes, a partial. It's very close to being total, but a partial solar eclipse will be visible across the UK this Wednesday evening. I'll be looking at what the weather's shaping up for that, but as well as a few other things, looking at what's been going on with the weather in the UK and also around the world. Hello, welcome to this week's Deep Dive. I'm Alex Burkill, presenter and meteorologist here at the Met Office, coming to you from our headquarters in Exeter. Remember, hit that like button, leave any questions and comments. We'll be answering them either in the comments or on the Weather Studio Live on Friday. And make sure you're subscribed and sharing this with anyone who you think might be interested in it. Do you know anyone who's going out to watch the eclipse and wants to know what the weather will be doing? I'll be looking at that. Or do you know anyone who might be within that amber heat warning area and needs to know about just how hot it's going to get? Let's get on to that first then. Let's look at how things are going to heat up through the next couple of days. Now, if you saw my week ahead forecast yesterday, you'll have seen me talking about the hot weather that's on the way, but let's get looking at the details. So currently, high pressure, that's in control. There's a lot of dry weather to come across England and Wales. That isn't good news when you think many areas are in drought. We have hosepipe bans, there are wildfires. We really do need some much needed rain across many parts of England and Wales. That's not coming anytime soon. I'll be looking at that in a second. But high pressure, as that high drifts away towards the east, remember our winds go in a clockwise direction around high pressure, and so that means we're going to tap into more of the hot air across parts of Europe. Temperatures in Europe are high as well. We have heat waves across various parts of Europe at the moment. In fact, we have hot air building from the west later on this week. I'll touch on that in a second, but let's start with the UK. And yes, as this high pressure drifts away towards the east, we're going to see more of a southerly flow across the UK, and that means we're going to get even hotter air coming in. So by Wednesday, temperatures are 33, 34, possibly 35 Celsius. And then the peak of the heat looks set to be on Thursday. Not everywhere. The heat is shifting a bit further eastwards between Wednesday and Thursday. So I think Thursday, that's when we're going to get the highest temperatures, absolutely across the UK. But notice there's this front coming in. And so particularly towards the northwest, even western parts, here it will be turning a little bit fresher compared to Wednesday, only a little bit, mind you. Then into Friday, and we're still clinging on to some hot air across parts of the southeast, but elsewhere that slightly fresher feel to things, and then fresher weather for all by the weekend for Saturday and Sunday. Another thing, let's look at these temperatures then, and if we get up our maximum temperatures for the next few days, and we can see, yes, Tuesday was a very warm, even hot day. Some places in their heat wave threshold for sure. And then Wednesday, as I mentioned, temperatures peaking around 33, 34, possibly 35 Celsius. The highest temperatures likely to be across this area of the Midlands and a bit further west into eastern Wales, even into the West Country. The London area, we're only looking at highs around 32, 33, so not as hot as other places. It's worth bearing in mind that the warmth is fairly widespread. It's across parts of Northern Ireland, even southern Scotland, where we're going to see temperatures in the mid, even maybe high 20s for some places, even eastern Scotland getting to the mid 20s. So it is very warm or hot pretty much for everyone. Then Thursday, as I mentioned, that's when we're likely to see the peak of the heat. So temperatures in the central eastern part getting to highs of around 36, 37, possibly 38 Celsius. Now, if we do get above 37 Celsius, then that would make it the third time this year that we've had temperatures above 37. 37 is exceptionally high. That would be only the 9th time on record in the UK where we've seen temperatures this high. 3 of those times coming just this year, and 7 of those times coming in the past 7 years, and 8 of them coming in this century. So that just goes to show how remarkable temperature above 37 is. I want to take the opportunity now to just highlight how there has been a lot of talk about the heat and the heat building this week. But if this had happened in many other summers, the talk would have been even higher. It's just because of how much hot weather that we've had so far. People don't want to use the word getting used to it, because they're not really, but they've heard it. They've it's not as surprising, as astounding as it would ordinarily be. But if this was our first heat wave and we were talking temperatures this high, we'd be it would be an even bigger story than it is, because it is exceptional for temperatures to be this high. There is the chance that we could get to 38. The highest temperature we've recorded so far this year is 38 on the dot. That was back in June. Yes, that was back in June when we set the all-time June record. And there's a reasonable chance, we're looking maybe 10–20% chance that we could see temperatures higher than that. The all-time August record is 38.5. That's not out of the question. Not likely, not expected, but it's not out of the question. In previous heat waves, the June one, for example, our models overestimated a little bit. There were models suggesting we could get 40 Celsius, and obviously we didn't get quite as high as that. But I think part of the reason that they perhaps overestimated was because they underplayed the moisture that was in the ground, because we actually had some thunderstorms in the run up to it, and so that would have taken some of that energy, so that would have meant that temperatures couldn't get as high as they otherwise would have. So the models got it a little bit wrong as a result. In this instance, possibly the models are overdoing it again, but we do have to take into account the fact that the ground is so very dry at the moment, and so it takes less energy for the air to heat up than it otherwise would have done. And so it's possible that they're actually underplaying it. But anyway, yes, 37 seems reasonable, 38 not out of the question. It could be the hottest August day on record. Unlikely, but not out of the question. What's perhaps could be the hottest day of the year so far. But either way, it is going to be hot. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we do have a warning out, and that's for this Thursday. It's through the bulk of the day across this part of the Midlands, East Midlands, in towards Lincolnshire and down towards the London area as well. It's in this area where we have the greatest chance of getting to, oh, my bad, I just tripped on something, temperatures of 36, 37, possibly 38 Celsius. Now, usually we save these amber extreme heat warnings for when you have a prolonged period of very hot weather. And whilst temperatures are going to be on the high side through Wednesday, they're not as impactfully high. Is impactfully a word? Probably. It's not. They're less likely to be as impactful. But when we're looking at temperatures of 37, possibly 38, well, that's when we could really see some significant impacts. It's worth at this point taking the opportunity to remind ourselves of the difference between the heat health alerts and our extreme heat warnings. So the heat health alerts are issued by the UK HSA, and they're to advise various operations that there could be extra strain on resources. People with underlying health conditions could be more susceptible. They're going to find the conditions more difficult. The majority of people would still be okay. But when we have an amber extreme heat warning, which is what we've issued, that's when the temperatures are high enough for there likely to be impacts to infrastructure. Roads can't cope in the UK with these sort of temperatures, nor can railway lines. And more people, even those without underlying health conditions, could really start to suffer just because of how hot it is going to be. Now, fortunately, there are a couple of things. Yes, this really is one hot day, or one exceptionally hot day in between a few hot days. And so that should make the conditions less severe than if this was going on for a little bit longer. And there's also the humidity that we need to look out for. So here I have our wet bulb temperature. And this gives an idea of just how uncomfortable, how humid it's going to be through this week. And let's go to Thursday. Now, there are some relatively high humidities across western parts, even northern parts. You can see it's above 20, so it's in this sticky category. But we're not in that oppressive or that dangerous zone. And if you think back to that June heat wave, when it was so humid, that's when it was really oppressive, really uncomfortable. And that's when it was especially difficult for sleeping at night, and it was just difficult going about your day. Whereas in this instance, humidity, particularly in the area where we have that heat warning, where we're going to see those highest temperatures, actually the humidity isn't too high. I mean, it's still going to be humid. No one's going to come out and say it's fresh and comfortable, but it's not as humid as it has been with some earlier heat waves this year. So that's good news from that point of view. So that helps reduce the impacts. But nonetheless, we issued that warning because when we're looking at temperatures as exceptionally high as we are, then it's always a risk. Now, one other thing that I wanted to show you is our minimum temperatures. As you would expect, they are rising. We've actually had some fresh nights over recent nights, and with temperatures in low single figures in some places. But we're going to see those minimum temperatures rising, particularly Thursday night, but even Friday night is going to be pretty warm. We're looking at tropical nights again. We've seen a fair few of those this year. I think we had our first ever tropical night in spring back in May. But yeah, more tropical nights to come later this week with temperatures staying above 20 Celsius. So it is going to be very warm, it is going to be hot. Let me know in the comments how you feel about another heat wave. And I say another heat wave, let's get onto it. Heat waves are a little bit tricky. We have our definition, 3 consecutive days where the temperature needs to be above the threshold, and that threshold varies from 28 in the southeast and around London to 25 across Scotland and western areas. And if you get those consecutive days, then it's a heat wave. That bit, we know, that bit we've defined, and it's quite clear cut. The bit that's a little bit trickier, and we've had this question a few times, there's been some uncertainty, some discrepancy, is just how many heat waves have we had so far this year? And the reason that it's tricky, I'll try and go through it, but it's relatively difficult to explain. But what I have here, I think I've shown a chart like this before on a deep dive, but it's from roostweather.com, really great website for looking at weather statistics. And what we're looking at is how heatwave coverage has been through this summer and also through May as well. And the top chart is looking at the percentage of stations across the UK which were above their heatwave threshold temperature. And then the middle chart is looking at percentage of stations across the UK which were in a heatwave for various days. Now, what we can see, if we use this middle chart, because this is your heat wave, this is just the threshold temperature, and you can see various peaks. So we had that peak in May, the highest ever May temperature, had that peak in June, the highest ever June temperature, and then we had that peak in July. But it's this July heat wave which is kind of causing us some headaches when it comes to the number of heat waves, because whilst there was this significant peak, where you can see it was quite widespread, lots of places were in a heat wave, it then never really ended. Well, it did eventually, but not until the very end of July. So that was quite a long heat wave. And then through the last few days of July and earlier on in August, we had sort of some 2 very small, short-lived heat waves. They weren't very widespread. They didn't last very long, just a couple, well, 3 days really, and so they weren't as significant, they weren't as widespread, and so we're kind of grouping them together in a way. And then we have this new heat wave, the one that we're currently in, the one with this this very hot spell that we're going to have as we go through towards Thursday in particular. And so it kind of goes with what you're classing, because you could argue that we've had 6 heat waves, or this is the 6th heat wave. You could argue that it's 5, and well, I'm not really that fussed with what you personally think we should do, because I think that's straying away from what's important. And I think the important thing isn't the number of heat waves, it's just how exceptionally hot it's been and how many exceptionally hot spells we've had so far this summer. Now, another chart, or a few charts that I can show you here, a couple of maps. On the left-hand side, this is the number of days where locations have been above their heatwave threshold temperature. And you can see the maximum. Some places have had 46 days above their heatwave threshold temperature since the beginning of May, so just over 3 months. So almost half the time they've been in their heatwave threshold, above their heatwave threshold temperature. And then, additionally, sorry, I'll just try and mute my laptop because that's going to go off a few times. Apologies, should have done that earlier. But then additionally, we have this area, this map on the right-hand side, and this shows the number of heat waves each place has had. And people would take this map on the right-hand side showing the number of heat waves that places have had, and looked at it and thought, well, the more heat waves you've had, the hotter it's been. But that's not actually the case, because let's take two imaginary places. But well, they're not imaginary. I'll give you two locations. So London, say, if it had, it was above its heatwave threshold, had temperatures of 29 Celsius on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but then Thursday it dropped down and then rose back up on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Technically, they would have had 6 days above their heatwave threshold, but also 2 heat waves. Then take somewhere else, Reading, for example, and they maybe have had 7 consecutive days with their temperature above their heatwave threshold. Technically, they would only have 1 heat wave, so fewer heat waves than London, but they would have had more days in their heatwave threshold temperature. So that's why, I mean, it's nice to count heat waves and to keep this tally, but it's become tricky with some places coming in and out of a heat wave, other places staying in a heat wave. You've had a heat wave here, then a heat wave there, and then the heat wave back here, and one never really ended, but it becomes a bit messy. But my point being, I don't think it's that important to get too hung up on the number of heat waves that we've had in the UK. I think it's more important to look at the number of days where temperatures have been exceptionally high to the point that we'd class them as a heat wave, because that tells more of a story really about how remarkable summer 2026 has been. Right, and then sticking with this theme then, and we're going with hot weather and looking at summer 2026 and comparing the number of days with heat waves, or the number of days above their heat wave threshold. Another great chart from roostweather.com, and we're looking at it compared to previous years. So we're going all the way back to, well, mid to late 19th century. The yellow bar indicating the number of days where somewhere in the UK has been above their heat wave threshold temperature, and the red bar indicating the number of days in the UK where somewhere in the UK has been in a heat wave, so 3 consecutive days above that threshold temperature. And what you can see, well, looking at the last bar, so 2026, it has now overtaken 1995 and all the previous years, apart from 2018 for the number of hot spell days, so number of days above that heat wave threshold, but not technically a heat wave necessarily. It has overtaken all the previous years for the number of days in a heat wave. But this yellow bar is only just below that 2018 value, and with more hot weather to come this week, there's still more time left in August as well, even regardless of what happens through this week and beyond. There's still plenty of time this summer for more hot spells, and so it's very likely, I think, that we'll top this, and so we'll end up with 2026, unsurprisingly, having had the most number of days with temperatures somewhere in the UK above their heatwave threshold, as well as the most number of days somewhere in the UK being in that heatwave. And it comes in this summer where we've had the most number of days of temperature above 30 Celsius, the most number of days above 32, above 34, above 35, above 36, could well be 37, depending on what happens on Thursday. And so it really is just a record-breaking, remarkably hot summer. Another thing when it comes to just how hot this summer has been. Now, this graph looks at the mean temperature across the UK so far this summer and compares it to average and previous years. Now, the current mean average is 16.48, which is significantly above the long-term average for summer, which is it's 1.88 degrees above that long-term average. And that is a significant amount, and you can see we're also higher than the record, which was set last year as 16.12. We only need temperatures to be greater than 0.21 degrees below average through the rest of August for this summer to come off as being the warmest on record, exceeding the summer of 2025, which was the previous record. So just to clarify, looking at what we've had so far, the current mean temperature for this summer so far is 16.48. That's 1.88 degrees above the 1991 to 2020 average, and significantly higher than the 16.12, which was the previous or the current record set in 2025. And we need temperatures to stay above 0.21 degrees below the average through the rest of this August for them for this summer to come in as the warmest on records. That's pretty likely. We don't need temperatures to stay as high as they currently are. We don't need temperatures to stay above average. We need temperatures to stay just a bit above, a little bit below average. So it's very likely that this is going to be the warmest summer on record. Then another issue that we've had this summer is the rainfall. There hasn't been a huge amount of it, particularly in recent weeks. Now this is a similar chart looking at rainfall through this summer so far and comparing it to average in previous years. And you can see actually the beginning of June, much of June was actually a bit wetter than average, but from the very end of June through July and even through much of August, it has been so exceptionally dry. And that's then had a knock-on effect. As I mentioned, many places are in drought, hosepipe bans here, there and everywhere, and there are wildfires as well being triggered. Now, it's worth talking about wildfires because the message doesn't seem to be getting out to many people to take extra care. Carelessness really does cause a lot of damage when it comes to wildfires. The weather plays a part, yes, how dry it's been, how hot it is. That is making the likelihood of wildfires spreading much more likely, but it's carelessness. The majority of wildfires in the UK are triggered by human activity. That could be leaving a barbecue unattended or not making sure it's cooled fully, discarding cigarettes, leaving glass bottles, which can also trigger fires as well. So it is really worth just highlighting and hammering it home because no one wants to see these wildfires, which are happening, yes, in other parts of the world, but also in the UK at the moment. But it has been very dry. So I guess the question is, will we see any wet weather anytime soon across England and Wales? I say across England and Wales because let's look ahead to tomorrow. Scotland, perhaps Northern Ireland, a few showers around, and on Thursday that rain perhaps becomes a bit heavier. I mean, Wednesday night into Thursday we see some fairly wet weather across Northern Ireland and also many parts of Scotland, particularly towards the west, northwest, with a few outbreaks of rain elsewhere. But look, England and Wales, where we desperately need that rain, it's staying dry and it's going to stay dry for quite a while. Apart from, a few spots of rain, they're not going to do anything to help the situation. They'll just barely scrape the surface of what's needed in terms of the rainfall. We need some long-lasting, persistent rain, not even a heavy downpour from a shower. It needs to be long-lasting enough that it wets the ground and then gives the ground the chance to absorb it and for that water to soak in, not just hit against it and run off. That would be near on useless. But yeah, even into the weekend, showery rain across northwestern parts of the UK, but staying dry towards the south. And even though things are turning fresher, it's still going to be largely dry. If I run through our rainfall totals for this week, and it paints a similar story as you would expect. There's some wetter weather across northwestern areas, and a little bit of rain for parts of Wales and Western England perhaps, but really it's just staying dry. And now there are signs that we could see something more changeable, something more unsettled coming in by Sunday, but so far this summer we've often seen instances where in around 5 to 7 days time the models are hinting at some wetter weather arriving, and then it never really does. It's almost the opposite of our 6 to 10 day ridge that we occasionally see, where there are signs of high pressure and more settled conditions around 6 to 10 days in the future, but it just keeps getting pushed back. So it's always 6 to 10 days in the future until that period of more settled weather becomes compressed and then never lasts particularly, or doesn't necessarily last as long as earlier model runs want. It's almost the opposite of that in as much as we're desperately searching out for some rain for many places, and there are signs in the models several days ahead, but then we get nearer the time, the rain doesn't become as heavy or doesn't come as heavy as it could have been. But yes, there are some signs of something more changeable for Sunday, but beyond that, not many great signs. I'll be doing the 10-day trend tomorrow, where I'll be looking more in depth, desperate search for some more wet weather. So yeah, very dry period to come still for many places. Not good news for those areas that are in desperate need for some rain. What is good news, perhaps, is the fact that you probably know there is a solar eclipse occurring. So it's probably worth reminding you what a solar eclipse is, and it's when we get the moon perfectly placed in between the Earth and the Sun. Interestingly, the Sun is around 400 times as wide as the Moon, but conveniently, it's also around 400 times further away from the Earth. And so that's why when everything's in correct alignment, well, that's why they appear as a similar size in the sky, and when then everything's perfectly aligned, we can get a solar eclipse. It's worth highlighting that the Moon's actually drifting a little bit further away from the Earth, not a huge amount, but it does mean in many, many centuries' time that we won't be able to get a solar eclipse because the moon will be appearing smaller in the sky than it does currently. Another interesting thing, we've got a solar eclipse this time round, but always either 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after, we get a lunar eclipse, and that's when the moon's the other side perfectly, so you have a full moon, but the shadow from the sun, the shadow from the Earth is perfectly on the moon, and so then that blocks it out. So yeah, we do have a partial lunar eclipse coming up in a couple of weeks. Now, in terms of how much coverage, well, it is a total eclipse in some parts of the world. Greenland, Iceland, parts of Portugal, Spain. Here it will be a total eclipse. In the UK, technically a partial eclipse, but coverage is pretty high. It's the greatest eclipse since 1999 for the UK, and the greatest eclipse for the UK until 2081. The only total eclipse for the UK isn't until 2090. The only total eclipse this century isn't until 2090. Now, coverage towards the far northeast of Scotland, Shetland, for example, around 88%. Towards the tip of Cornwall, around 96%. And where you are also depends on where we're going to see, or when we're going to see, the maximum obscuration, with it being earlier the further north you are and later. So it ranges from just before 7 p.m. to just after 7:15 p.m. in the south. So make sure you've got your glasses, your special certified eclipse glasses or a pinhole projector. Don't look directly at the sun and try and enjoy the spectacle. But I guess the question that we really need to answer, I mean, we're the Met Office, so this is our specialty, is what's the weather looking like? So let's go to Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock. Let's go and let's see what the latest situation is. So let's start with the good news. Much of England and Wales, lots of clear skies, great visibility. Remember, because it's happening around 7:15 p.m, the peak that is, the sun's going to be quite low in the horizon. So look to the west, you might need to get to some higher ground away from buildings, that kind of thing, but you need to be able to look west to where the sun is setting. Little tip, maybe if you've got some time, you're watching this before 7 p.m. on Tuesday, head out to where you're planning to watch it on Wednesday and have a little look just to check that you can actually see the sun at around 7:15 p.m. But looking west, western coasts, higher ground, perfect place to try and view it. And across the bulk of England and Wales, there will be lots of sunshine. Eastern parts of Ireland also seeing lots of sunshine. But the further north and west you are, far north of England, much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, there's some thicker cloud. Now there will be some breaks in the cloud, and the sun will be able to appear through a fair amount of cloud as well. So the cloud needs to be pretty thick. The Western Isles, it looks like it will be a bit wet, and so the cloud's going to be quite thick there, and there will be some cloud. So Northern Ireland and many parts of Scotland, it's not looking great. I don't lose all hope. Things could change. The cloud could break up at times. You only need it to break up a little bit for you to really get the spectacle that you might be hoping for. But yes, for the bulk of England and Wales, good news from a weather point of view. The cloud looks like it's not going to cause a problem. Lots of clear sky here, just less so further north. Let us know where you're watching it. Let us know how you get on later on as well. Then one last thing that I wanted to touch on, because Super Typhoon Dolphin has swept its way across the Pacific. It's been quite an interesting feature for a number of reasons. Interesting because of how quickly it intensified. It went from being just a tropical storm to the equivalent of a Category 5 hurricane in just 2 days, fueled by these warm seas, sea surface temperatures of 29, 30 Celsius. Not a huge amount of wind shear meant that it could get all that energy behind it and become a super typhoon, and then it swept swept across westwards towards Asia over around 2 weeks. It's taken quite a long time. At its peak strength, had sustained winds of around 165 miles per hour. Fortunately, as it came closer across near the southern islands of Japan and then made landfall in China on Sunday. Fortunately, by that point, it weakened, but it was still the equivalent of a Category 1 hurricane. So it had, sustained winds of around 95 miles per hour. It brought a substantial amount of rain. I think around 1 million people in China were evacuated because of it. Now, there are a couple of other features. There's a system heading towards Japan at the moment, and then there's another developing feature that's likely to follow a similar track to this one. And so there are a few other things out in the Pacific and affecting Asia at the moment, but I just wanted to highlight Dolphin. I know Aidan talked a bit about it last week, but it really is quite a remarkable storm that has occurred. Right. Thank you very much for watching this week's deep dive. Hope you've enjoyed it. As I said at the start, do hit the like button, leave any comments, any questions. Make sure you share this with anyone who you think might be interested in it. And we'll see you again soon. As I mentioned, I'll be doing the 10-day trend tomorrow, and I'll also be back with Aidan doing the Weather Studio live on Friday. Have a great day. Enjoy the eclipse if you're able to watch it. Make sure you watch it safely, and also look after each other. Look out for friends and family during the hot spell, particularly if you're in that amber extreme heat warning, because yes, it is going to be another very hot day. I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.